Okay, thanks very much. It's my pleasure to join you all. I realize that the bulk of today is going to be discussing the treatment of prisoners. I thought I would take a slightly different approach to start it off. And what I wanted to do was to address the refrain that is often heard from supporters of the Israeli government, where they say, well, we may be doing things wrong in Gaza, but we're not as bad as Hamas. Because look at what Hamas did on October 7th. Hamas on October 7th deliberately killed civilians, they've abducted people, and we're not so bad. So I thought it was useful to address that head on. I mean, everybody knows that as a legal matter, war crimes by one side don't justify war crimes by the other. So even, given that what Hamas did on October 7th was blatant war crimes, that doesn't justify Israel ripping up the Geneva Conventions and the laws of war. But I'd like to actually take it in a bit more focused direction and look at, does Israel actually make efforts to spare civilians as it combats Hamas in Gaza? And I think a useful way to look at that is that, Israel would say, oh, we're not deliberately killing civilians. But a key rule to protect civilians is the presumption that they are civilians unless proven otherwise. If somebody's walking down the street in Gaza, they are presumed to be a civilian unless there's clear evidence that they are combatants. And it's useful to kind of look at how that plays out in terms of how Israel has been fighting this war. I think we're all aware that when it comes to civilian structures, that presumption is often thrown out the window. So, why else has Israel, destroyed all of Gaza's universities? Why is it going after key cultural centers? Why is it, attacking big apartment buildings, often after telling people to leave, but nonetheless just destroying, what are seen as prestige targets, an effort to sort of exact collective punishment. But it's really worse than that, because if you look at how Israel treats people, not just structures, you see that the required presumption of civilian status is often ignored. And the most obvious case is when so-called kill zones are established, and anybody who walks into a kill zone is shot, whether they're armed or not, whether there's any indication that they're Hamas or not. It is reflected through things like the use of artificial intelligence to target people. And, I think we're all aware of the efforts in Geneva these days to abolish what are known as killer robots, that is to say, fully autonomous lethal weapons. And the antidote to that is to have what's called a person in the loop. So even if, an algorithm says, shoot so-and-so, a person is supposed to be able to say yes or no. Israel has been using algorithms to select targets. And while there is technically a person who reviews the algorithm, the media accounts have shown that these algorithms are given enormous deference. And so in essence, an algorithm is deciding who to kill, which in my view is not compatible with the presumption of civilian status. To make it worse, these algorithms are often tracking, even low-level Hamas operatives to their family homes. And they do this because it's easier to find somebody at home. If you're looking for somebody, they often go home at night. But of course, a family home is a home of a family. And the family is presumed civilian. So even if the Hamas fighter is a legitimate military target, his family home is not a legitimate military target. And there's no effort to, insist on the rule of proportionality, to insist that, is this single fighter really worth killing his entire civilian family? So these are examples of how this presumption of civilian status doesn't play out. I think it's useful just to kind of elaborate in a bit more detail. If you look at the World Central Kitchen case, here, let's take Israel's perspective on this. Israel said, oh, there was a drone operator who thought that they saw a gunman step onto one of the trucks. That was supposed to be justification. Now, first of all, this observation turned out to be false. There was no gunman. Even if there was a gunman, how does the drone operator know that this is a Hamas fighter as opposed to a security guard? There's a lot of insecurity in Gaza. But even more to the point, let's say that there was a gunman on one truck. These were three trucks that had left a known humanitarian warehouse. They were traveling about a mile and a half apart. They were not right next to each other. And nonetheless, the Israelis killed 7 people in 3 different vehicles. There was just no justification for this. And again, this was ignoring the presumption of civilian status. And we see this, over and over. We see it with the rescue of the hostages, where Israel, first of all, chose to do this in the middle of the day, supposedly to surprise Hamas. But the middle of the day is when the market nearby was filled with civilians. And then when one of the rescue vehicles got stuck and started taking fire, Israel responded by bombing the entire market, seemingly just dropping bombs at random. And there are many cases like this that I can get into. I don't have time in my 7 minutes, but I'm doing this really to show that this presumed, better nature of the Israeli military effort. This statement that, we may be making mistakes here and there. We may be starving Palestinian civilians. We may be bombing indiscriminately, but we're better than Hamas. When you start looking at how it actually plays out, both sides are pretty much ignoring the presumed civilian status of people on the other side. So I will stop there. Thank you.